She did.
All right, we're going to go ahead and call this meeting to order. We're a little bit late.
It's okay.
11 minutes.
It's 3:11 on July 19th. This is our regularly scheduled meeting. And if everyone would take a minute to look over the minutes from last meeting. Most of that meeting was dedicated to approving the Lexington Art League's sculpture project, the Castlewood Downs sculpture project. And we approved the entire project pending the submission of engineering stamps. And as of this date, we still have not received those. We were supposed to receive them the Monday following. We still have not received those. And so that's part of the conversation about when we start the conversation about the bylaws. So just bear that in mind. Has anybody seen the sculpture?
I have not been there yet.
Stacy, I know you did. Okay.
There
All right. So let's go ahead and look at these minutes and look carefully.
I have a question about the minutes.
Sure.
And it has to do with the Castlewood Downs.
Sure.
There were things that were questions that we asked that were answered about individual sculptures.
Yes.
That aren't in the minutes, which I understand you can't write everything.
Yeah.
We were answered with lies. And I wonder if we need to look at the tape and bring them back. As an example.
Yeah,
just-
that's
just
no
a-
problem at all. Sure. In fact, I can get into Granicus and do all of that. So yeah, absolutely, that's no problem at all. Yeah, because I actually thought of that same thing. I was hoping someone would bring it up because after we spoke, we'll get there. But we had similar concerns about that, and there were things that were said that weren't actually done, which normally is not a huge deal. I try to just get the gist of it with the motions, but in this particular instance, I think it's important. So I will absolutely do that and recirculate. I think it's a good idea. Yeah.
Thank you, Kurt.
Were there substantial misdirection?
Yes.
There were a handful of times where someone on the board would ask, and someone had their head on that, and the answer would be, oh no, it's 10 feet in the air, and they're like this high when I stand next to them. There are things like that that aren't, they're substantial enough that it's unlikely they were just it's not a miscalculation. It's
Part of our charge is to review safety for
Yeah.
liability reasons, and so that's why we were asking these questions. So it is important that we get an accurate answer.
Do we still need a motion on the minutes?
We deferred, didn't we?
Or do we defer?
Oh, okay.
If you want to, that's probably best, if that's okay with Chad, and then I'll make those, and I'll recirculate, but then at our next meeting, we can give approval. I would like y'all to put your eyes on it, make sure I got everything,
Okay.
and then that's fine.
Not in memory. Okay, so we're deferring the approval of the minutes from the special meeting. Sonia, did you have a comment or question?
No, well, it does relate to the minutes, so since we're deferring, that's good. I was asked a question by someone in the Castlewood neighborhood as to whether anything had come up about the neighborhood involvement. And I said, there's minutes, and I recall some kind of conversation.
You asked it.
And
Yeah.
I thought I had asked something. I thought someone had asked something, and
Yeah,
but
they
when I
had said
came
they
back
had
and looked at the
public
minutes, I
meetings.
didn't see it. I asked that person I wasn't sure the process for them seeing the minutes, so I just said, call you and check on whether or not.
Well,
it hasn't been able to reach me this week, but
I was asked similar things.
yeah,
Yeah.
and and I can kind of speak to that just being on that board. There was a public meeting. All of the neighborhood associations and neighborhood groups were invited. They had a couple different ones to get the word out.
The question I was asked specifically, it might have been the same question, could even be the same person, was did we ask if there was neighborhood support from the neighborhood? And we did. There was and that Sonia might have been the question you asked, and the response was that there were meetings, and the response was something like there was overwhelming support. As it turns out, there was not. There was considerable resistance. I don't know that is,
I'm gonna have to ask about the considerable. What
Well, the person I talked to said that she and two other people were pushing back pretty hard.
She and two other people, but there were about 30 other people
Were
who
there?
were not, who were very excited. And I was there. So,
Oh, that's good.
yeah, so I did see that. And some of the pushback was, the pushback I heard there were some good questions, the placement. Would they have sensitivity to the kids in the neighborhood play in that park? And of course, Parks and Rec helped them with the placement to make sure so those kind of questions were answered. Some of the other questions, the pushback, it really wasn't necessarily specifically about this event itself and just
Bigger
the
questions.
bigger question of why aren't you out in the neighborhood inviting people in?
Right.
And they tried to answer that.
Which also isn't uncommon for there to be that kind of pushback when it's public art, it's not all local artists, which
Yeah,
shouldn't be the
yeah,
case.
Or non-representational art.
yeah. And I guess I can say, one of the people who was there providing a lot of pushback for one of the neighborhood associations, I actually mentioned it to someone who's a member of that same neighborhood association, and she said she wished that woman would stop going to places speaking for their neighborhood association.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, you know how it is, you try to get public,
That's right. We all know
and
how.
I have to say
that
that they truly did try to get public, they truly did.
They truly did. And it's
Yeah.
very often the case in my experience that a public meeting can be held and the perception of the receptivity of the group is entirely colored by the opinions, the individual opinions of the audience. And that's, and my idea didn't win sometimes feels like I wasn't listened to or opposing views weren't entertained.
Yeah.
It's not objectively always the case, but that's
Yeah,
subjectively to the hearer how that can be.
Yeah, that having been at the meeting, that's how I would have to take that.
But if you asked the question, you did ask the question, if it's not in the minutes, that's one, I can just go through that too, but there was a lot.
It wasn't because someone had said something to me in advance. I thought I had asked something like that,
Yeah.
but it does make me wonder after being approached last week. It makes me wonder to what extent we as a board want to assure, or do we want to assure whether a neighborhood has weighed in, and whose point of view are we hearing about it? And just, this particular person felt like, oh, there was a Ucarb meeting about it? We didn't know, we could have come to that. And I don't know how they would know. We wouldn't necessarily go tell the neighborhood to come.
It's kind of the nature of public meetings. I mean, we have hundreds of them every week, and it's up to the citizens to know when the public meetings are.
So,
Which seems harsh,
well,
but
I don't know.
it's,
I'm making a note.
yeah.
There may be a local arts council that can maybe help with that.
Yeah, I think, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, no, I mean, we announce and everything, because we're legally bound to announce all the public meetings. But as far as reaching out, into super tight,
ordinances or the-
it's just not, we don't have the capability to do that.
Well, considering the Lexington Art League didn't come to us until very late, I don't think it's a surprise maybe that the neighborhood association didn't know that there was a meeting about it either.
Yeah, a lot,
An observation.
they have to make a lot of the neighborhood association meetings at the Loudon House.
Yeah.
That's where they happen.
A lot of the neighborhood around the area take place there. So I don't know which ones, but they host a few of them. And of course, all of the parks, camps take place with the Art League.
Since we are rarely surprised by a Ucarb meeting, it might not be difficult for Lex Arts to push this out on its weekly
Yeah.
Yeah.
FYI. This is where public art gets discussed. If you would like to know more, here's present yourself at the security desk and see where it is this week. 3 o'clock.
They're always doing something exciting.
The mystery meeting.
Okay, so we can move on to agenda item number 3, which is the review of the Ucarb bylaws. And I meant to put down the ordinances too, because that is actually the mandate that Urban County Council made to create Ucarb, and that was about 15 years ago when Jim Clark was president of Flex Arts, and these, do you have it up there?
Yeah, it's coming.
Okay, sorry.
That's okay.
Yeah. I meant to ask you to get a copy of that for everybody so we could make sure we were following that. But essentially, the ordinances, we can't, I mean, that's from
This
Urban County
works.
Council. That's
Here, of course, our lawyer had it.
Oh,
Wonderful.
Yeah, it's the only copy I have. Sorry, I didn't read copies
No,
of it.
that's
yeah, I
okay.
won't write on it like I write on everything else. Okay, essentially it just says an Arts Review Board is hereby created, which shall be known as the Urban County Arts Review Board, herein sometimes referred to as the Ucarb. It's established for the purpose of reviewing proposals for permanent visual artwork, including but not limited to memorials, monuments, and lighting projects for its aesthetic opportunities with regard to its design and installation and toward conservation or permanent artwork in public spaces. And then it goes on to define what artist means, what Arts Council means, and permanent means, and I'm going to read this because this was an issue, means visual artwork including but not limited to a fresco, mosaic, sculpture, and other architectural embellishment of functional art created by a professional artist, artisan, or craftsperson, and any work of visual art including but not limited to a drawing, painting, sculpture, mosaic, photograph, work of calligraphy, or work of graphic art or mixed media. All such artwork that is designed to remain in place for 1 year or longer is defined as permanent. All such permanent artwork described herein shall become the property of the Urban County government upon placement. That was kind of an issue because of the Art League's 2-year sculpture projects, so they kind of fell into this gray area of temporary/permanent. Public spaces means any real property or improvements owned or leased by the Lexington Fayette Urban County government and open to the public, including but not limited to courthouses, libraries, administrative office buildings, plazas, right-of-ways, and parks. And then the next item is really just what the Ucarb needs to consist of, which we already know, and then the terms, which are repeated in our bylaws, and then the meetings rules, which is Robert's rules, all that stuff, that's all in our bylaws. The duties, now this is really important to go over. Adopt bylaws which are not consistent, the Ucarb shall, as permitted by law, adopt bylaws which are not inconsistent with this article, so within this framework, which is what we're gonna do today. Review proposals for permanent artwork in public spaces pursuant to criteria identified herein. Advise the Department of General Services, Division of Risk Management, other appropriate Urban County government decisions, and the council member in whose district artwork is proposed to be placed at the time a proposal is received. This is actually staff duty, right?
Yeah.
That's part of it, yeah. Further, any work of art requiring extraordinary operation or maintenance expenses shall receive approval prior to placement and installation from the Commission of the Department of General Services, and we do a good job of that, I think. You do a good job of that, yeah. Ensure that the interaction of the artwork and the function of the public space will be compatible. Promulgate rules and regulations consistent with this ordinance that are approved by the Urban County Council, including but not limited to a selection process and selection criteria for the approval of artwork in public spaces. Selection criteria for works of art shall be based on the following: public safety, installation and maintenance cost, appropriateness of scale, social and physical context and location in relationship to site, permanence, artwork remaining in place for 1 year or longer, and aesthetic appropriateness, which that's pretty big. The approval process shall consist of the following: initial design proposal, fully developed design, and installation process, upon which time the permanent artwork becomes the property of Urban County government. And so that's it. That's pretty vague. And then from that, 15 years ago, thank you, Chad, these bylaws were adopted. And so I'm hoping everybody's had a chance to look through these. The article, a lot of it is repeated from the ordinances. There's some specific things that are left out. more than changing what's here, there's some things that are left out that we've encountered, such as non-compliance, and we also, on a couple occasions, have found that the project proposal that the artists and artisans in our community have to fill out could use some tweaking also. So after we finish with the bylaws, we're going to look at the project proposal and, assume you're one of the artists filling this out, and what questions would you have? How accessible is it, and what would make more sense? So, and it could be you think it's fine, but I just think it's important at this time, since we have the time to go over those things. So, having said that, I'll leave it open to conversation. And this is still a public meeting, so we need to make sure we're being respectful of everyone's comments. Table's open.
Well, that, every time I remember reading this before, but every time I hear the statement that it becomes the property of the urban county government, it's like, how is that?
We've had this conversation. I'm going to let Chad explain that, because Nan and Chad had a better understanding of this from where they come, from their background than I do, so.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's basically a default rule. It's not going to apply to every circumstance. In circumstances like what we've just done at Castlewood Downs, where we work out some sort of formal agreement with the artist in advance that they're going to retain ownership, that would be the case. The agreement in that case would supersede this sort of default rule. This is really just, and honestly this would probably be the case even if we didn't have it in the ordinance, we're really just sort of making explicit this idea that if you place permanent art on our property, the assumption is that you're giving it to the urban county government and it's becoming ours. So it's sort of establishing what do we do if you put up a sculpture and we don't talk about who owns it, and then we're 5 years down the road and we're trying to figure out, okay, who actually owns this now? Does that make sense? So we're not sort of commandeering anyone's art. We're not creating a situation where we're forcibly seizing art from artists who don't want to give it to us.
Could we not then just have an additional statement that says, unless there's an agreement in advance that the artist retains? Is that not, to me, that would be useful. I remember reading, I thought, wow, does anybody object to that?
Yeah.
That doesn't seem to work.
So we don't have the board doesn't have the authority to change these ordinances. They're set by
We
council.
can change the bylaws, but not the ordinance.
So
Yeah.
that's in the ordinance,
Mhm,
that's what the ordinance says.
Yes.
All
Now,
right.
if you all really wanted, that's something you could sort of petition the council to go back and change. But it's not something that
I could do that,
you all
yeah.
have the right to change on your own.
Right.
And so what we, that would be an exception, because that's from, that's part of the ordinance. But with the bylaws, our process, as I understand it, is that we could vote on a recommendation to Urban County Council, and then it would be on their agenda, and they approve it before our bylaws are officially changed.
We did change the bylaws or something.
Just the wording
Yes.
of Lexington Arts and Cultural Council to Lex Arts. And then there were a couple of things Kurt had picked up on.
There were a few, we also changed because they had wrapped this up under the courthouse area design
Design review,
board
yeah.
as part of the process, and that it was more, we
Was that the
removed
bylaws
that.
or ordinance?
I don't remember, that's what I'm,
Yeah, so I wasn't here for that. So, brief background, you all are allowed to change your bylaws with a majority vote. So you
Without
can-
going to?
Yes.
Urban
Without
County
going to council,
Okay.
yeah, so those are entirely within your all's control.
Okay.
The ordinances are not, that requires council's
Okay.
action.
Thank you for
I
clarifying that.
am not familiar, I'm actually glad you mentioned that. So I wasn't here when, whatever the involvement was with the courthouse area design review board, but most of your all's bylaws really, let's see where that begins. I think section or article 8 through the end of your bylaws are pretty much verbatim taken from the
Exactly.
courthouse area design review board,
Oh,
which doesn't really fit very well for the way you all function. The courthouse design review board is an adjudicatory body. If you're familiar with the Board of Architectural Review or Board of Adjustment, it's similar to those, where it's issuing rulings that have some sort of quasi-judicial weight, for what you're allowed to do or not.
right.
Whereas you all, as we've talked about before, are an advisory body that's lending your expertise to the government Often, like it says in the ordinance, the Department of General Services, the mayor's office, something like that, and advising them on how they ought to proceed. So most of your bylaws, honestly, probably don't really apply to what you're doing.
And indeed, on page 8, under section 8, article, or section D, the design review board, that should have been a change.
Yeah, there was
and
a
it
couple-
lingers, so I think that the language
Yeah.
has been adopted wholesale, and this was a change that didn't get made to reflect the new application to this board.
Right, so that's why we're doing this.
Yeah.
I think, and it's good. I mean, sometimes when you're confronted with an issue you don't know how to deal with, effective
Yeah.
changes made, and that's pretty much what's happened here, so. Okay, so do we feel like, should we take a vote on whether or not to add to that wording?
I think
So, question would be, I guess, if just to play devil's advocate, so let's say a sculpture gets put on public property 5-10 years down the road, nobody knows who owns it. If that clause is in there, I could just come out and say it's mine and try to find, prove ownership of it. Is that why the statement is not in the regulations right now?
I'm sorry, I'm not sure I followed.
So if the way that it's worded now is very, kind of arbitrary, it's very kind of open to interpretation. And it seems like what you're saying is that it's in there in case that there is a dispute that comes up and the sculpture or the artwork, doesn't have an ownership, contract anywhere that you all can find in your paperwork, then the city would gain ownership of that.
Like, say you were John Hunt Morgan's great-great-granddaughter, and all of a sudden you came up and said, hey, that's supposed to be mine.
Right.
And say, okay.
Right.
Where is she?
So-
How can we never been waiting for you?
She showed up.
Yeah.
Right, so I could lay claim to that, and my question is, based on your, if we don't have that clause in there, then there's no kind of lawsuit that can probably go forward because it's in the regulations that the city owns it after a certain amount of time.
Who's the burden of proof on?
Right.
The city or the artist or the claimant?
It seems to me that in the way that it's written now, the burden of proof would be on the citizen
Yeah.
to show ownership, and I think that's
Yeah,
probably
that's
the
interesting.
better way to go, and that's why it's not as specific.
I felt the same way you did when I reread this. I was talking to Kurt about it. I was like, I don't understand this. And actually, I met with Chad to talk about it because I didn't understand.
Well, it sounds like it has worked. It's working.
Yeah.
I'm not recommending we
There
spend
might
any
be
time
something
trying
else
to
we need to change
suggest the
that might
ordinance be
be
changed. Because
higher up on
apparently, if LexArts hasn't bumped into it being a problem, or the artists whose work is out there in these various places don't feel like the government is taking over their work, then it's
Right.
not worth the effort.
Well,
I would like to offer Nathan an opportunity to speak if there's something that you can interject, that's because you've been at many of these meetings and we really depend on your.
There have been a couple times that we, like in the process of de-installing an outdoor exhibition, and so we're starting to take artworks down, but we haven't come by with the crane or the knuckle boom yet to move the pedestals. The kind of guerrilla artwork will show up on those, and I have no information about who it belongs to, where it came from, and at that point, we've scheduled all this equipment to move these things, so we have to take down whatever has appeared there. So I think it's good to leave to the city's discretion that if a piece appears, a fly of night, that they're able to take it down if they need to. And often this stuff is not secured in any way, so there's often, even just it being there could be a public safety concern because it hasn't went through this, this type of review. So I do think that, having that kind of backstop there for the city to be able to justify the removal of something that did not go through the procedure is necessary.
Yeah, those are two really good points.
We're talking
Yeah.
about things that are intended to be temporary and end up beyond the year deadline.
Yeah, and that's I think another, Nan brought up another situation that sometimes things will be proposed as a temporary project, and so they may not go through this body, but if they are, after a certain period, that this would go into effect. So, once it goes past that, and so a lot of times those permissions and those site permissions and things come up that you've allowed for a year exhibition, or just under a year, whatever that is, it's a temporary piece.
They
But-
overstay their visa.
Yeah. And actually,
Yeah.
we do have a couple pieces
Right.
like that right now that, have for kind of extreme circumstances are still out in the public realm, even though they were intended to be short-term. So, and one of those are the silk blooms that were commissioned by corridors that are still out. The only one that's actually on city property at the moment is there near the corner of Broadway and Main Street. And those pieces are on city property and have been beyond the time that we had intended them. Unfortunately, it was an extreme circumstance that the artist passed away about a month ago. So we're just kind of being patient with the family to figure out what to do, how to approach that. So so there are times that I think the city clearly probably wouldn't want to go in and take ownership of those, but it's a matter of being sensitive to the case by case.
Okay, so Sonia, since you brought it up, how do you feel about going forth with
Let it
change?
ride.
Yeah. What, let it ride? Okay, let it ride. All right, so the purpose is pretty much pulled exactly from the ordinances. It's weird, there's a comma after projects, and it should be a period, or else maybe is there anything else that, including but not limited to memorials, monuments, and lighting projects?
Ucarb is still speaking.
What?
It's a joke.
Okay.
It's a joke.
Can someone define aesthetic appropriateness?
No.
Yeah. Maybe, let's go down, is it?
I don't know where it is in there, but,
For its aesthetic opportunities,
Opportunities is what-
review the design, installation, and conservation of permanent visual artwork for its aesthetic opportunities. I mean, aesthetics are very personal thing. I mean, it's hard to.
I think in the other document, I think it was written as aesthetic.
Aesthetic appropriateness, yeah.
In the ordinance.
It does say aesthetic appropriateness. So should we be consistent and change that? Wonder why it was changed, I'm sure that was intentional, from aesthetic opportunities to aesthetic appropriateness.
I think not. I think that's a mistake.
A spell check overlook.
I think it is too.
So
Yeah.
do we need to make a motion and vote on every little change? Or on every article?
You could.
And you can do that, but everybody
Let's do the whole
seems to be.
thing.
Okay.
Yeah, I would.
All right, let's do that then. Let's just go through and have a conversation
What
about
page
changes, and then we can make
Five.
one vote to approve the changes. Okay.
Page 5
This
of the
is-
packet.
So the changes to aesthetic appropriateness from
Yeah.
opportunities.
There's a comma and then appropriate
And then to-
opportunities.
For its aesthetic opportunities, with regard to
That was
its
sure.
design and installation and toward, we don't need that second,
Yeah.
that and in there.
It's still, I think it's still a good question. Maybe we should talk about what aesthetic appropriateness.
Yeah, I know, I'm just trying to
Oh, yeah,
get
to get it
the
in.
wording
Okay.
changed. I think I've always questioned that, and I know that I've advised you all sometimes when we maybe didn't particularly care for a piece, that we're not really judging aesthetics, but
Right.
yet at the same time, when it says aesthetic appropriateness, I think that's a conversation we need to have.
Maybe we don't need the word aesthetic for its appropriateness
I
with
think
regard
just
to its design and
appropriate.
installation.
I don't know, I would like, I remember early on in this board, and we had a few members that were very vocal about aesthetic quality.
Right.
And it doesn't, I mean, there's a difference in appropriateness and quality, you know,
Well, I
and
think
they're
that-
both,
Truly subjective.
yeah.
And I do think that one person in particular I'm thinking that was vocal about that would say very clearly, like, if the goal of the board is to make sure things aren't offensive or
Uh-huh.
dangerous,
His aesthetics were offensive.
some of these things were aesthetically offensive to this person.
Mhm.
And is that the role of the board to say, like, this thing, we all agree this thing is aesthetically offensive, it can't happen? My take
As in
is
subject matter or
just the way it
you
looks.
don't like the colors?
I think so.
Well, I have
Subject
more
matter
gestalt
is-
view.
because I think subject matter becomes much more about what can it be offensive, whereas aesthetic appropriateness, the way it has been interpreted by some members of this, is it offensive to me that someone calls this art and that it's supported? But since the first purpose is to encourage art in public space,
Right.
I mean, to me, I think that overrides our position to determine whether we think it's good or bad art, right?
I do, I mean, I think that this is really referring to, appropriateness.
We've never really been challenged in that way. We've never had anything
Well,
come
we had a
before
really
us.
big, are the statutes appropriate? That was a big question we asked. This, to me, is more about,
More, yeah,
it is not about our aesthetic taste. It is about,
artistic aesthetic.
this is government, public right
Yeah.
of property for the citizens. We've got some rules we have to follow as what we can put out there.
But we've gotten lots of calls that the government people have been upset about Henry Clay being painted on the Phoenix building because he owns slaves, and people have been upset about it. It was mentioned last night, actually, in the work session, but there's been calls, beyond that. People thought the mural was offensive in the distillery district. That's not our building, but
Right.
it's an example. Hundreds of phone calls. Scary,
and
it was scary, it was whatever. You got most of them.
Oh,
but-
for the
MTO,
yeah.
Yeah.
And there might be such a thing as aesthetic appropriateness. For example, if there were a work of art that didn't have an ostensible subject matter, something that was abstract, but was, I don't know, scary in its own way, would we want that on a public building across the street from the Central Church Child Care Center? Or would we want something kind of goofy and playful, which is the kind of thing that's at in the back of the art league on the other building? Would we want that in facing the courthouse? I think there is such a thing as aesthetic appropriateness that's aside from subject matter that might actually just have to do with design. But for me, aesthetic means not just quality, although it does mean that. And it doesn't mean just design, but it does mean that. And it doesn't only mean subject matter, but it also means that. It doesn't just mean decorum, it also means that. It's a term that incorporates all of those things that gives us some latitude for discussing it without having to go through a checkbox, which at the end of the day would not work, because we're talking about art. And this is at some level appropriate, or subjective, and what we find appropriate a century from now might not be, and that's exactly what we're wrestling with now at Cheapside. So,
Yeah. I might also add that we're each on here because we're professionals in our field, and if it's a sculpture project we're looking at, then we would be dependent on you to offer up maybe more than anybody else about the appropriateness or aesthetic appropriateness or any information on that. And, I was talking to Jason Tony about the safety of some of these sculpture issues, because that's kind of, their wheelhouse. And I think that we
and I'm
just
the
all
art
need to
historian, and
consider-
I just did that.
Yeah. Well, exactly.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
we're all, and I talked to Ed about that too, to look at those sculptures. So I think that we all need to think about what our role is here and what we can contribute to each specific proposal.
From the, kind of my interpretation of the aesthetic appropriateness, again, what you were getting at was context. Is it contextually
Sure, in
appropriate?
part, yeah.
And then more from my perspective, is it scale appropriate?
Yeah.
So.
It's definitely an
I see some of
aesthetic
those
concern.
What do you think, Mike? Does that answer your question, or do you want to add to that?
I agree. I feel like a lot of times in many of the discussions, I've had to kind of hold back some comments that, when you have an artist who's going through an organization and they spent months and months going through the proper channels to raise money, and then they get to us and they present it. I don't feel it's in my place to say that their design is awful. Or push them, but at the same time, their designs are awful. And I don't, I think there's a way that this board can try to nudge them and do it in a respectful manner.
I think we can do
That's
that.
not just,
with
not
the-
just safety concerns, but at that point, it's probably too late anyway. But that's, for me, personally, that's a struggle. And I tend not to say too much,
Yeah.
because at a certain point after the presentation, it's like they they figured out the safety stuff, everything's there, there's not really anything else I can offer other than it's a terrible design.
Yeah, I mean, that's a hard call because so many of these things come to us and an organization has
Right.
actually gone through
Right.
a process
Right.
to choose
They've
the
done
artist.
everything they wanted,
They
right, they've
picked
done it
it.
right, yeah.
And they
Well,
like
that's-
the
That's
design,
right, that's
and
right.
we're,
right.
that's not why we're here.
Exactly.
I have,
Guys,
I have seen in one case that this body did deny, yeah, sure.
No, don't
Doing well?
It was, so we can have
Hey, I didn't want to interrupt, but I just want to say, I should shake everybody's hand and say thank you all very much for all of your early work to get us where we are today. Challenging work. I know that you all really put in a lot of effort and a lot of time, and sometimes the wheels don't move as quickly as we would often prefer, but they do move, and I just want to express that to you all. You were there early on with some very heavy lifting, and genuinely really appreciate it. You were dealing with the issue and the question that now the whole country is addressing and working toward. And so I've said it, I think, 3 or 4 times already, but thank you. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Mayor. We took our charge very seriously. I think over 50, 100 books and articles were read between us, and we worked really hard to come up with our best opinion, and I'm glad you listened, and this is happening. We're all very excited about it, and we'd love to be a part of any future requests that you have to further this.
There are a lot of very creative minds around this table, and I've learned in this role that listening to ideas and thoughts and suggestions is probably more than 50% of what it represents.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have those, I sometimes say we have crowd control on ideas, but that's okay. This is the time for it.
Every voice counts.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. Y'all got anything that you need that I can help with? There's some answers that I have, and in fairness, there are a lot of moving parts right now.
I have a question that you might have the
Yeah.
answer to. Can you explain how, if the council votes to relocate the statues, how or why it's a felony then to relocate them without a military board approval? I mean,
I wish I knew that answer
Okay.
entirely. That's my understanding of the law. Good question, Kurt. And examining that and asking that question is worthwhile, and it's being done.
Okay.
Yeah. Anybody else?
I do have a question about the same thing. So you're at request, have you already requested a special meeting with them?
That's part of the resolution.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
To ask for the Military Heritage Commission to
Everyone's on pins and
move up
needles.
their November meeting.
To September.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
All right. Well,
And all, what we know is that it is unlawful to move them without their permission.
Right.
Right.
Oh, that's how it's written, okay.
Yeah, right. If that was the question, did
Yeah.
you say? Yeah, it's unlawful to move them without their permission.
We had a hand extended to us today here in Lexington from Americans for the Arts, from their public art section. They are creating a network of cities like Lexington who are struggling with exactly this issue, knowing that we're probably too busy to reach out to one another, and so they've undertaken this. So I was glad for that.
That's
And,
great.
so we'll have some partnership
Opportunities.
opportunities.
So what are they
To share
suggesting then?
information,
Yeah, okay.
just to share experience, information, some
Okay.
ideas, because different places are going to come up with some different solutions to things. Of course, we all have very individual spins on this
Yeah.
problem, but it'll be good to be able to share experience. So I'll
Well,
look forward to bringing that
Please.
forward.
And don't hesitate to contribute if you get some good ideas, because we really are that is the currency right now.
Absolutely.
Good
Good
ideas
ideas.
are very, very high premium. Okay, thank you all very much.
We're
Thank you,
here
Mr.
if you
Mayor.
need us.
Thank you, Mayor.
Nathan?
I was just saying, there was one case that I can remember that the Ucarb board did disqualify a project based on aesthetics alone, so there's a past precedent
That
for
big
that.
statue
And
thing, I
honestly,
remember
I
that.
don't think that it was, as an organization that put the time into developing all those parts, it was one proposal amongst several that we presented to the board, and they really encouraged us, by doing so, encouraged us towards the ones that really pushed the, kind of the art that was being made in Lexington to new places. So I just want to say that I as an organization, representative, I think that is something that we can appreciate because it kind of gives us encouragement in certain directions. So.
I actually agree with that, and I also think it's interesting because this project proposal has conceptual review, and conceptual would indicate that it hasn't developed fully enough that it can't be altered. And if we're in place to help, guide them and advise them, the groups or artists to tweak, for safety and appropriateness, then if it says aesthetic, I think it's fully within our respectful realm to offer up some ideas about that, to make suggestions.
And I wonder, it seems to me, I was thinking the same thing, Georgia, that the process seems to be designed to intercept ideas or to intervene with ideas or participate with them before they get to the point where the layout is done and the colors are picked and the proportions are all bad, wrong. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of entities don't learn that they need to come to us until rather later in the process. So I think that part of it, the process may actually be set up to kind of aid and abet in that helpful way with aesthetic
Which doesn't
issues.
mean.
But they don't find out until there's an awful lot of work already completed. And I wonder what we can do to make folks proposing public art aware sooner that they need to be engaged with us.
It's a little
early.
awkward too, though, because if we're artists and you imagine you're the one on the other side of the table and you've got this, person you don't know all of a sudden critiquing your artwork, it does get really dicey. But I'm just saying, I would suggest that you be very, very selective and,
It's definitely a slippery slope, and I imagine what happens if this entire board gets replaced, then they get replaced with people that are not as talented as us. Then I was the artist going up in front of the board to try to get my work approved, and I would be pretty upset.
You would want
if
some consideration.
right.
That's
So
why
I don't think it's something that we need to formalize at all, but I would like some wiggle room to kind of voice my opinion at some point about the work. Respectfully.
Right.
I would agree that if we can figure out some ways to get the information out to groups who are, especially those who are likely, that we think might be likely to bring projects forward so that they know the process, to try to intercede so things don't come to us so late. But at the same time, at this point, I don't think we want to see a whole bunch of skimpy little proposals that we then have to make recommendations for concept on. They need to have been worked out pretty well before they bring it to our board, which
That's
only means
really-
so often.
We won't have a lot to say. Yeah.
So we
Right.
won't be in a position to do a lot of changing, but we have, getting Castlewood Downs, when they just kept saying, it's going in next week, it's going in. I mean, that's just way late. We need to have things a little earlier, but we don't need to see them
And I
at a
think
point we
that,
can do a whole lot to them.
I think that's kind of an individual problem.
What do you mean?
Not a system problem.
Yeah.
I think that's fair to
Not a
say.
system
We haven't experienced that before.
Yeah.
And I think if we change
Oh,
our,
Castlewood is an
if
individual
we change our
problem.
bylaws to
They-
deal with one problem rather
yeah.
than the general.
Yeah, I mean, generally speaking, most things come to us through parks or through Lex Arts or through,
Well, and the process is that it comes to Jennifer. Usually they come through you and you tell them to call Jennifer. I mean, historically, that's what's happened. And Jennifer looks at that and just sees it and sees if there's anything glaring missing, and would make. That's part of what her part on this board is to contact them and let them know things that they need.
Yeah.
And yes, the Castlewood Downs is definitely a unique situation.
Because I think Parks was involved. I think maybe there was a little too much leaning on Parks to make this part happen, not really understanding that wasn't Parks'
Right.
role. And then once that got established, we got it in, but it was like, obviously.
Okay. Any more questions about aesthetic appropriateness or how to? Okay. So the grammatical part of this is review the design, installation, and conservation of permanent visual artwork for its aesthetic appropriateness. Doesn't need a comma there, right? With regard to its design, installation, and toward conservation of permanent. That's such a long sentence.
Yeah, no, that "and" does need to be there
It does. Yeah, it
between
does.
design and installation.
And design, installation, and toward conservation of permanent artwork in public spaces, including but not limited to memorials, monuments, and lighting projects. And I think I was on this board when lighting projects was added. But is there anything, I mean, it's actually pretty inclusionary because it says including but not limited to. But should that be a period, or does anybody feel like something needs to be added after that?
The only question, and Nathan and I've tossed this around a little bit, is, and I'm looking for, there's not a designation of exterior versus interior. And I think the assumption for most of this board's existence has been about works of art on the exterior of public buildings. Nathan's now engaged in a pretty big and likely to grow program of putting art inside community centers. And in some cases, they are three-dimensional.
The storybook.
And the storybook, for example. And so does a project like that has an interior as well as likely exterior components come before us?
I would say so, and also, one thing to keep in mind, the council's gonna take on a percent for art as the city. So and Nathan's been in some of these conversations with Councilmember Farmer, he's helping with the corridors public art, but that's coming to committee this fall, where we would allocate 1% of all capital projects, 1% of that into a fund to do art, which I imagine in some of these larger facilities we're doing, we would put things inside, it doesn't necessarily have to be outside. So we may find if the council passes that policy, that this comes up more. I mean, we had talked about doing a mural in the senior center and some different things a couple of years ago. So that is not fully developed, but I imagine if we get a big enough pot, eventually there may be some things in, bigger installations inside in lobbies and these types of things.
Right, and some of those things can be big, hanging, where scale and safety are.
And to your point, it doesn't say this, and
Relevant.
this was another conversation I had with Chad about that, because this document actually insinuates that it is interior and exterior. There's nothing in
Property.
here. Yeah.
Public spaces.
Public
And
spaces.
public spaces. So I think that's a really good point.
But not limited to memorials, monuments, and lighting projects. That's only three, murals. It's kind of excluding a lot of,
It also,
it's calling out those.
well, the ordinance actually went into great detail, mosaics and calligraphy. I mean,
I wonder if these are here, Stacy, because they might not be the things thought of. Memorials are not always thought of as art and lighting projects,
but
not
I would
necessarily
agree,
thought of as
we should
art.
clarify that it's interior, exterior. And it could be something like three-dimensional interior work, because if we get into portraits and,
Installations.
that gets,
Now we really are getting up in
Yeah.
people's aesthetic business.
exactly, and that's a lot. We would be
You don't
having a
want that in your
special
office.
meeting every single week. That's a
Public
lot.
spaces, is that defined any?
Government
other than that?
spaces.
I mean, is it defined as government? Because, a mall is really a public space.
No, I would say public right away.
Public right of
Publicly owned.
Publicly owned.
Publicly owned, but does it say that in here?
The ordinance clarifies
ordinance
it's
does.
all land or all real estate owned or leased by LFUCG. And it would just be those portions that are open to the public. So if they wanted to put a sculpture down in the lobby of the government center, that would be under your purview. If the mayor wanted to put a portrait up in his office, that wouldn't, because it's not open to the public.
But in, like, even the mayor's portraits that are in the council chambers.
Yes, that would be a public area.
And
Yeah, those probably should have come through this process. We had talked about that.
It's looking right at you, sorry.
Thank you so
Okay.
much.
Thanks, Philip.
There's not generally going to be a problem with when the government puts up artwork on its own property.
thank you.
There's not going to be a big. Procedurally, it probably normally needs to be sent through you for your all's evaluation and opinion. But if the government chooses to go ahead and do something without your opinion, there's nothing illegal or necessarily inappropriate about that because this is an advisory body. And ultimately, you could issue whatever advice you want, and the government could choose to ignore it and do what they want anyway.
I guess that could happen.
Keep the faith.
Fortunately, it doesn't happen often.
Yeah, but, I was using this building as an example, but like with the library, think about that. They have the gallery there. I mean, but when we're thinking about things under a year, of course, that wouldn't come under, but sculpture in the library, in any library, any of our.
But in the library, we don't own the library.
Yes, the library is actually a separate governmental agency. So that generally we do think of that as public property, but for the sake of your all's sort of purview, it's not.
Okay.
So.
Does it
So-
distinguish state right-of-way versus city right-of-way?
Yes, yeah, it's just real estate basically owned or controlled by LFUCG, just the city.
Well, would your recommendation be that we add, does anybody have an opinion on wording, clarifying interior, exterior, three-dimensional interior?
And the word is permanent. I mean, I just can't imagine you'd all want to get involved in exhibitions that we put up every 6 weeks at Arts Place.
No.
CAC and Lex
Yeah,
Arts.
right.
and
Which are public
Family
spaces,
Care
city
Center.
owned.
But that's under a year, so I mean,
that's
like,
different. Yeah.
yeah. That's come up before. Nathan has dealt with this issue a lot, more than anybody that's come before us. And, I think that we owe it to the artists in the community and agencies to clarify that, so they'll know. I mean, I don't, these gray areas, sometimes those are beneficial, and other times it's a snag.
Yeah,
And I
right.
just think,
Well, I think about, I like the book. I've seen the book, and it's definitely the kind of thing where you're like, oh, they've got that secured.
Yeah.
It's pretty big. But then there's also a lot of, just drawings and framed things on the walls. And for me, unless we make that clarification, that's when we get to that area of, I don't think we should be deciding if the family care center.
yeah, but then that becomes.
I think making sure something is structurally sound and.
But we can't always know
Yeah.
that Nathan's gonna be there. We trust him and know that he's gonna ensure.
Yeah.
We can't assume that.
So I just don't know how you make that distinction there on that interior stuff.
Everybody's looking at you, Jen.
Yeah, I mean, I can say the ordinance is written broadly enough to include interior installations as well.
Can may we simply ignore something at our discretion? Say, we trust you, this is fine, nothing in here for us to weigh on, go knock yourselves out, go ahead. Or don't knock yourselves out.
Jennifer
but-
can do that.
I mean, it can be.
I do that more than I should.
Don't give away your secrets up here, Jennifer.
In the
That
ordinance.
gatekeeping function, I think is,
I do think that, I was looking this weekend, I do think there's some opportunities on our website for this body to make some narrative changes that would be very helpful. And I would also like to do an online application that just dumps into a Google, it's a big headache scanning things in, scanning it again, putting it in a Dropbox. I think, but I do think there's some narrative where I could be perhaps more clear about who needs to come through this process, interior, exterior, we might be able to do some things that don't involve changing the bylaws, but make it easier for somebody that wants to approach this board. We've had to do that with corridors a few times, make some changes that were just made it easier for folks to understand the process.
And I think, I don't want to take Nathan for granted ever, but we actually, most of the information that comes through us is generated through LexArts or Nathan
Michelle.
has.
Yeah.
Or Michelle.
And we can't always assume that both of them are gonna know these things, so I just think.
Yeah, and that kind of goes back again to where it's kind of rare we have something come through that hasn't been brought to us by, I'm trying to think if we've had any
I think since I've
any
been-
experiences of that, even since I've been here. Because, if an individual comes and wants to do, for instance, Prohibition, when they wanted to do the Lincoln,
Yeah.
on
a city building.
they wanted to do it on the Phoenix building, before they ever got to this body, we had to go to Jamshid and General Services, and, we had to go to their council member.
You were holding their hand.
We had to go to the CEOs, there's a whole hand-holding that kind of takes place before they ever write anything down on that paper other than checking off those.
Well, this, to my point, I don't want to
So
take you
you're
for
another
granted either.
gatekeeper.
You know, you do so much, hand-holding and guiding people, but what if you weren't in this position? I mean,
It's the process that's required.
So
It has nothing to do with me being here. It's the process that's required. So I would say, like, if I weren't here, Jennifer probably end up.
Yeah, because it's not to say every mayor would have somebody in Lori's role. In fact, it could be quite the opposite, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And at some
You know.
point, if it's public property, either it goes through channels in the city or it's vandalism, no matter how beautiful it is.
Yeah, you can't
I mean,
put up a mural
officially,
on
you
the Phoenix
can't just
building.
haul off.
Yeah, that's true.
And people do, but it's not legal. And
Didn't you have a piano out in one of the
Yeah,
parks?
we did actually have somebody put a piano in Jacobson Park, and then it was like a social media project. Like, people would go out there and play and take their photos, which was actually a cool idea. But of course, General Services didn't think it was. I said, I love that. Don't move it. But anyway, we did have somebody try to do like a pop-up thing that would have been there in the woods for a while until it got discovered by the government. So we did have it once, but then we took the right channels to get that out of there.
Yeah.
Those benches, they kept showing up around town.
And benches, right, the benches.
Is
Art
that,
will out.
is that process currently kind of spelled out online on the website?
I think it could be clearer.
Yeah, 'cause I
I
like
sometimes
that
have tried to like search, like
Yeah.
Google search, do I want to do a public art project? You know what I'm saying? And it doesn't necessarily
Right.
like straight come up. I don't know how many hits we get on our Ucarb website, but it's
Right.
not much.
Yeah.
So I don't think it's super intuitive. It could be better.
Yeah.
And I can work on that. That's something that I could change with Lori and Nathan's help,
Okay.
Which I think would be helpful.
Yeah, again, I want us to look at this through the eyes of an artist or the eyes of an arts organization. That's why we're here. So,
Exactly.
yeah.
That availability of that kind of form would also be something that'd be great if Flex Arts could link to it. Because as
That's
an
a great
artist,
idea.
I don't know that artists would think of looking on Ucarb's website.
They would never.
No,
I wouldn't
but-
think.
but Flex Arts.
No.
Okay. So
Yeah, I
thank
mean, that's a sentence.
Mhm.
Please be advised that if you're planning a work of,
on public.
on public land, you need to go through,
And put a link on there?
Yeah.
find their
That would
form
be very
here.
helpful.
Yeah, it's simple.
Okay, yeah, great idea. Okay, so a period after lighting projects. So the Article 3 and 4 are just about membership, and then about being removed from the board and ethics. Anybody have any question about that?
I have a question that's more global. Could we just change all of the chairman to chairperson and et cetera?
Thank you, Chairwoman.
Chair.
Yeah, chair and vice chair.
And
I'm a
the,
lazy boy.
and the LexArts representative is uniformly
He.
listed as he.
Yeah,
So there might be an opportunity to make the language inclusive.
President-elect serves.
Throughout.
Serves. What is it, right, they, what is,
He or she.
he or she? It. That changes every year, it's hard to keep up.
They.
Exactly. It's so hard as a first language, really.
Yeah. Any other suggestions for change?
I found a typo on page 8.
On page, because I was
Page 8,
looking at
are you not there yet?
No, I was looking at my own notes, and so they're not numbered as yours is, but yours are, but,
There's
let's
a
see.
one-sentence paragraph, a little past halfway down. The board shall make no requirements except for the purpose that should be of preventing artwork that is incongruous in scale.
Okay. So that was ahead of where I was, right?
Which actually speaks a little bit to the aesthetic appropriateness question, kind of steers away from it. Shall make no requirements except for the purpose of preventing artwork that is incongruous with scale, design, and materials.
So you're on C.
I guess.
You're on in Article 8C. That's pretty much, unless anybody else has any questions about procedural things and board members, then we can move on to this authorization permit for exterior changes, new construction. And then procedures, because that's pretty much where I think we need to freshen up and add to these bylaws. So you made it, Nan, you're the grammar
Yeah, I'm the grammar.
police, so if there's anything else, you noted that?
Well,
I did, okay, yeah.
Before we sort of dive into the weeds on that, I might encourage or invite you all to discuss section or Article 8, especially beginning there in subsection D through the end of it, where you get into the discussion of how this authorization permit process is going to work. As I mentioned earlier, that's really a hangover from when these bylaws were taken from the Courthouse Area Design Review Board and doesn't apply to how you all operate. So I think most of that could probably be removed if you wanted, or at the very least would need to be significantly revised to fit
Article
what you all
8.
actually do. Yeah, Article 8 through the end of the bylaws. All of those
So
are
sounding the
taken
agenda,
Yes,
from
sounding
a
the
postponements, no
Board,
discussion.
yeah.
Three.
And is there something in 8B guidelines? I found design guidelines for the courthouse district, but I didn't find on the
Yeah.
city website design guidelines for
Same
Urban
here.
County public art, which might have
Yes.
answered some of our
Exactly,
aesthetic
I kept
questions.
thinking, well, we
Do
should
those
know this.
exist
Who
where-
is this
They,
body?
as far as I'm aware, they do not. And that would actually be, part of the ordinance that organizes you all invites you to sort of flesh out these 6 considerations you're given. We were talking about aesthetic appropriateness earlier, things like aesthetic appropriateness, public safety, installation maintenance cost, appropriateness of scale, social and physical context and location, and permanence. You all are invited in that ordinance to sort of flesh out selection and design criteria beyond
so
that,
that's what-
sort of like what they're referencing there, except that's, as far as I know, never been done. So,
Okay.
So the rest of this is really kind of irrelevant.
So Article 8, A through D, or A through C is irrelevant.
you could
I think through D.
you could do Article
Through E, the whole
8
thing.
through
Yeah.
Article 14. Through Article 12.
Oh, interesting,
Right.
okay.
Would all be
Yeah, that really apply. Because a lot of this talks about staff, like,
which
Yeah, I was wondering, gee, I guess we've never had a case to which this applies, but it just doesn't apply.
It doesn't, so yeah, that's when you start yawning and glazing over and thinking,
Yeah.
I'm just gonna,
Yeah.
just like algebra. Okay, so, does anybody have a question or concern or issue just totally deleting Article 8 through Article 13? Is that what you said? No. Article
12.
Article 12. Extension of time for authorization permit.
I think this wording, authorization for permits and all, certainly doesn't fit, but if we take all that out, which we certainly could, it does seem like we should still have something, I don't know, maybe about meeting procedures, something shorter that replaces.
Isn't that in 13?
That comes to the end, is that the one we're leaving?
Yes, that's where it tells that the Roberts Rules of Order.
Yeah. Revised, newly
Is that
revised.
enough? So govern the
So
proceedings.
it really was cut and
Okay.
pasted. But that that's not to say that we don't need to add some things. So we can get rid of 2 pages of this,
Yeah,
but there might be areas. So again, look through your artist eyes.
I will point out as well, in the organizing ordinance, you do have some guidelines on what the meetings are supposed to look like. I can do that if you'd like. This is the ordinance, I think that might be the bylaw, but they're at 232. So it's not gonna cover everything you would need to know. Most of that would be covered by Robert's Rules of Orders, but you do get some of the foundational elements in the ordinance.
Is that the same ordinance that we have?
Yeah, but it's after the section that we have.
Oh, this is.
She said it's 2,
Yeah,
232.
I was wondering
We
why
have
they
2,
brought this in, and I'm
231.
not
Oh, I
asking
see.
the whole thing, but since it's 1:15, I'm not gonna even
Yeah.
try. Yeah.
All right, well,
Well, I wonder if some, at the risk of making more work for somebody and not the group, I wonder if some parts of this could be kind of wordsmithed outside the meeting of the whole and the next, because I don't,
That's what we did for corridors the last time, like I worked with Mike Sanner, and we sat down and fixed stuff in there, because it was so difficult because there was legal things that right off the bat we could just fix, that weren't applicable, like in this instance.
Yeah.
That might be good to bring a draft of that to the next meeting and then digest that, but that's
Yeah.
just.
and
All right, so-
someone might be able to work with the full copy of the ordinance, thank you, and plug in those meeting procedures that make sense at the end where we took out all these ones that didn't.
so it might just be, cutting and pasting from this and not doing it that way. But, and under the review, since we're kind of short on time right now, if any questions arise as to the compliance or if the arch review staff person, this actually only refers to staff. So this doesn't even, there's no mention of compliance in this entire document. And
Anything in the ordinance that has
No.
anything to do with compliance?
No, I don't believe so.
As a advisory board, do we have any stick?
Any recall?
Yeah.
The current administration in this particular instance, when I was on vacation, Chad was trying to help me, but they had suggested, both our CAO and our Commissioner of General Services wanted the board to give them direction as to what you think would be best in the Castlewood situation. They hadn't been involved, so they didn't want to just say take them all down or leave them all up, or they wanted guidance, and the law commissioner was the same way. So I think they are looking to you all for some guidance. And then Chad and I will bring that to them, and I think they'll probably make a decision, would be my guess.
so the areas in which there was non-compliance was, well, the engineering stamps had never been presented at all. And then the facts that were presented about each individual sculpture that we reviewed were not accurate on many counts. And so it's an issue because it sets a bad precedent in our arts community. If we're telling them they have to go through this, I would rather not be considered just a government hoop to go
Yeah.
through.
May I back up a little bit, because I think I was on vacation too. Jennifer and I can't go on vacations.
No, it's impossible.
I don't really know what happened, how we got to, where the CAO and the.
Well, what happened was.
Did something happen? Did something
Yes,
fall?
I mean,
Or,
what happened was we made a motion somebody made a motion that they would get us the engineering, they would go they'd get us the engineering stamps by Friday. They didn't get
That's
that.
obvious, yeah.
So then, come Monday, there's still no stamps, and then whatever day that was, Wednesday, there's still no stamps. And so I was up in Michigan and I called Sally, or I actually emailed her with a copy to Chad and said, we don't have stamps, these things are structural, they're in a park, they're this and that. There was a motion made that said you have to have the stamps, and we made 3 exceptions or whatever my email said.
We approved the project conditionally.
Yes, and
right.
it got installed without the stamps. And so I asked them for advice as to what we should do. Chad and I conversed, and they said, well, we would really like the art board, as we have often done with PDR, the board to look at it and then bring us back what we should do. So essentially, every time I would email the lady from LAL, she would say they're on their way, send me email strings, and now it's been, 3 weeks maybe, and I still don't have them. Okay. And so I felt like I had to get Janet and the CAO involved in case something happens out there. I don't want to say Chad and I knew we didn't have stamps and someone gets hurt. Absolutely. That was where I was coming from. So I was trying to be proactive, and then we thought, well, we'll schedule a special meeting, and I was out of town last week, so I said, we're meeting Wednesday, we'll put it on the agenda. So they're waiting for this board, I think, to give them some direction. And perhaps after the, meeting, Georgia we'll talk to the law commissioner or Jeff, but that's where we are. My fear was something would happen. I heard that some of them are lower than others. Somebody would have, and they would get hurt and the process wasn't followed and they're installed and we own the land. So that was, I think, Chad and I's concern.
Yeah, I'd be super concerned about that.
Yeah. So that's where we are today.
The one other thing I think that is different from what we were presented is that there were a few that the bases that were part of the sculpture were larger than the concrete base. And we were told that there would be 2 concrete bases to make that okay and to make it stable. And there are none of them there that have 2 concrete bases. They're handled in a few different ways. One of them is mounted in such a fashion that the sculpture actually just overhangs the edge. And maybe that's fine, but it's certainly, I don't think we would have thought it was fine if we're looking at it. And another one is the sculpture overhangs the edge and they've kind of piled up dirt around it to make a dirt larger base. So, I mean, there are solutions, but they're not what was presented to us.
Yeah, this is so bothersome to me because from the beginning with this, there was such, we'll just wiggle our way around these rules and just a lack of respect for the process and why we needed to,
We were very generous.
we were very generous. Yeah.
And trusting, and
Yeah.
I feel like it's such a bad precedent not to have some repercussion, some kind of consequence, and I just am looking to this board and the city's looking to
We
this
just
board
don't-
to
we don't
figure out a
have-
way.
We don't
Well, I
have
wonder
jurisdiction
if-
for consequences, do we?
No, it's we're recommending
To
to
the city?
another
Yes,
body.
to Sally and Jeff, basically what they
We
should do.
wouldn't, and we're not liable because we're an advisory
I
board.
think
but-
potentially what we could do is look back at what we were actually told and just ask them to match those statements. So one thing is that means at least 2 of the sculptures are gonna have to get a second base next to each other. And probably 2 more of them are gonna have to get a second base on top of them, because that was something else we were told, that if it wasn't high enough, they would put it up, they would stack the bases. And they're not as high as that we were told. So, I mean, that's one suggestion we could make is look back at what we were told and just say, not only did you not get the stamps, you didn't do these several things that you told us.
And Kurt, in that instance, would you suggest that Chad and I tell our team that, I mean, that has to be done by a certain day, or give them a timeline, or, what, then there should be a consequence? I want to make sure, because the minute, if something happens and this has to come down, the paper will, and I don't mind whatever happens, but I think we just have to be sure we've recorded everything we're supposed to do, and the time that they're supposed to do it by, and this,
Well, they've already had 3 weeks now.
Yes.
I mean, you have to
I
get.
think it's been
It
3.
was, and I am totally for the sculptures being there. That's, and I, know some of the people that have them there. However, they were told these are not approved until we get this information. In any other instance, you don't get it. You've already given them 3 weeks, so you can give them another.
Our meeting was
however many days.
Wednesday, and the opening was Friday.
Right.
Yeah, that's correct.
And it was kind of an awkward situation too.
It seems to me the most important thing would be to make sure that the engineering's correct.
That me
We don't-
too.
We don't know
Yeah.
if
Yeah.
the second base, maybe they need 4, and maybe it's not 2, because, I mean, if something happened, that's on us, right?
Well, that's what I'm kind of wondering. Is it possible we don't have the engineering stamps because they won't?
Absolutely.
Well,
But that's, they would have to at least call in an engineer in to look at the situation and assess it, and that's gonna cost them money.
Would it be
I saw
outside of-
Stephanie on Monday,
Sorry,
and she
I saw
said something about the stamps, as in we finally got them.
We have the money for it. That's what
Maybe
she
that
said.
was
She
it.
said we have the
Raise the
money for
money.
it, but we were told that 3 weeks ago too, they had the money for
But
it.
that's what concerns me, is that if they haven't gone through that process, then they have no idea if that is engineered correctly.
So-
Zero ideas,
I know.
Is
They
it-
have to.
It's possible then that
experience
Pogue
it.
Engineering is ready to make the stamps. They just haven't been able to be paid for them. Is that a possibility?
I'm not sure.
We've
if-
been told twice they've had the money for it.
Okay, because if that's true, is it outside of our purview to contact Pogue and say, look,
Yes, I think so.
we need to know if.
I think it is. I was
Is it?
tempted to do that
I
too.
would think it would be.
Well, Chad, one thing, I mean, just a suggestion, we can talk to Janet and them, but perhaps we need a formal letter from the LFUCG that says these stamps by this date, you know, this is up in a public park, and just see what I mean, I don't know what you would suggest, but I do have concerns if kids can reach the ones they said they can't and the bases aren't right, heaven forbid
Absolutely.
something happens there. Oh my heavens, I mean, you know, so I don't know what
Yeah.
law's perspective is, but perhaps that's something we could do. But,
Risk management would have,
What was it?
yeah,
I mean, that,
Yeah.
that's their biggest concern.
yeah, that's correct.
They may have some input as to
So-
who can defer risk.
So should we add to the bylaws if there's non-compliance, then, I mean,
Will you send it to legal? I mean, how do we? what do
Perhaps
we-
the board could make a recommendation to the administration regarding,
When,
You know.
are you speaking of just when there's non-compliance in general?
yeah.
Yeah.
You could put something in your bylaws to address that. Generally, you're set up to be a sort of, looking forward body, not looking back. So most
Never
likely,
had this issue.
yeah. You could add something to the bylaws. I don't know that you need to. Generally, the way this would play out is if there's been some sort of non-conforming use. You know, you granted approval, the government told them they could go ahead. We discover a month down the road that they haven't complied for whatever reason. At that point, the administration would decide either they want to handle it themselves, they know how they want to handle it, or they would like you all to weigh in. I would imagine often they'll want you all to weigh in because they're having you all do all the heavy lifting on the front end as well. You know much more about the project than they do. So they would be sending that back to you on a case-by-case basis.
Okay.
So I don't know that you necessarily need a bylaw to address that.
Tanya?
Depending on what this initial thing is that's going out to them about the stamps, engineering stamps, it seemed like it would be good to have someone from the administration go and physically take a picture of all the installations so that you really do have a concrete evidence of
documentation.
at least what they look like. And to someone to, I don't know if that's possible, but to assess the situation. How many of them are not, besides the stamps, the engineering stamps, how many of them are not what we were told they were going to be? Is it 5? Is it 3? How many are, not accurate?
And what's the harm that's likely to happen? Some of them may be installed differently and it's not material, but some of them may actually be subject to gravity in a way we don't.
And we approve them, so it's not like we want them removed. So I think with the idea of making it right and making it whole and doing it now would be the minimum. But they need some sort of a warning, and we know what's going on here, and this isn't what's to be going on. That's a severe, can be severe. You get a letter from the legal office and
And the stamp actually considers height and safety, it's not just the security of the weight and everything. So
the
I think
stamp
just
might answer
request,
some of those
exactly, and
questions
that's
for us.
why
I'm hearing.
we were,
Well, the stamp's not gonna address
That's
high
wind
height.
load and all that stuff.
Yeah, that's
though.
not-
It's just
not-
load.
It's not
Okay.
walking around height.
Okay, that's what I was asking. Okay.
Can I ask a question? If you if you were to send a letter like this, would this be something that would just go to the executive director, or might it also go to the chair of the board?
We could address it to both.
I think you should.
Okay.
I would second that recommendation.
And maybe CC all of us.
Sure.
Okay.
Yep.
The
So,
chair of the board of the governance person.
I happen to know that the governance person is out of town as of the 23rd.
Okay.
Because I'm trying to set up a meeting on another matter.
Okay.
So it sounds like, in addition to some grammatical errors and some great conversation about some of the wording that hopefully is now clarified, that we, a couple of us need to get together with Jennifer and actually come up with some, removing parts of the bylaws and then adding some things that are taken from the ordinances. And Mike?
I'll take a look at I'll volunteer to take a look at the application.
Okay.
And
I don't
just
think we
make sure
can
it's-
meet we can't have more than 3 or something in a meeting, so if you want to do it, and then I do it, and
Yeah, otherwise I think we have to announce it, but I mean.
Yeah,
you
yeah, it's not,
but,
yeah.
You know, but yeah.
Anybody else want to be a part of that? Honestly, if anybody has, like at home and you,
droves for that.
yeah, we're all just.
You think the art police are popular, or the grammar police? Oh.
I'm a rule follower. So, then, as far as answering to the people that ask you to give us this charge, the suggestion is to send a letter. I'm just asking for clarification. I'm looking for nods like, yeah. For clarification, to say that we need the stamps by, well, you're gonna actually come up with some more.
Yeah,
like,
I think, well.
details about the minutes, right?
Yeah,
And then-
yes, that's right, but I think in the meantime, what we can talk to Janet and Sally and Jeff, probably tomorrow, and just tell them sort of where we're headed. The longer we wait, then it's another week and another week.
Yeah.
So I think, and if they're okay with doing this, I have no idea if they are, but we'll find out and
Yeah.
then go from there. But I think that's probably a good suggestion.
And I think if the goal of the letter is to make it right. you know,
Yes, sure.
With the knowledge that they plan to do this every year. If they did it wrong in a way that they were aware of doing it wrong and were made to do it right, then hopefully that would mean that next year they do it right.
I think that this is a moment where we can show that this is an important, that it's not just a rubber stamp.
Right.
That these are professionals, because I feel like that kind of implication that we didn't know what this body, I think we need to kill that narrative really fast. Because, I think we are pretty serious about, we don't want sculptures falling on children in parks.
We were told several times how much experience was on that side of the project.
Exactly, I guess that's what I'm trying to say, is I think the work we've been doing, we've only been doing regularly and consistently for a couple of years. And the more we are consistent and follow what we require is.
So the body of the letter should be to say that that compliance should be, the stamps need to be in our hands within.
Yeah, does anyone have a suggestion? Chad, do you have a suggestion how much time to give
They've already had 3 weeks.
Yeah, that's really up to your own
Yeah,
discretion.
It was Wednesday and Friday.
Yeah. I think
Don't rest and stay safe.
Could we word it too that if
Be really nice about it.
they don't have the stamps, tell us when they plan, like give us the.
we already done
the-
that.
oh,
No, but
okay.
actually we didn't. We said Monday.
Well, but then the wording would have to be or what? Like if they're not.
Right.
I think that's the thing,
Then
is like, what do we
then
do
are these
to them?
sculptures?
Why don't we check with Janet?
the
to see if
sculptures
she's
graffiti at
comfortable
that
with it,
point?
you know?
I think
sculptures
I'd rather
be-
ask Janet what
Okay,
she wants
so-
to do.
Barricade.
That's what I was thinking,
I
too.
know, I don't know how long
Protect
it's been. They said they were gonna have 2 weeks ago, so I don't, I don't know.
Yeah.
So yeah, I agree with that. If we're gonna say you need to have them there needs to be a consequence that's
I
actually.
really feel like she's right, I feel like talking to Janet might be.
Uh-huh. Because it could either be removal or a citation.
Or
You know?
barricade them, cordon them off or something.
Yeah, I think it'd be good to get.
That wouldn't
Janet's
happen in
input on
that
that.
castle.
I worry about how long this might
That's a lot of
linger.
yellow tape,
We
but-
don't wanna leave those out there if
Sure
they're
mess with the
hazardous
aesthetics.
until our next meeting.
Right, but
Have you
but I mean, my question is, we don't have the authority, or do we have the tools to,
Of course, but,
Yeah.
again, that's where the
Organize
advisory thing comes in.
And then you'd be like,
Sonia, you have something to add?
Well, I was just thinking, should the engineering stamps just show up tomorrow, there still should be a letter of some kind
I agree.
pointing out to them their non-compliance. I mean, if the letter goes out and the stamps come in, they cross paths, it's one thing. But if they really do get them and they show up before the letter goes out, I just think the letter should still go out. It may need editing to acknowledge they came in, but that they were.
I agree completely, because they should be a
Remiss.
leader. They should set an example. That organization should set an example, not
Okay.
be playing with.
I think it's beyond the stamps, though. I think
It
it's
is beyond the stamps.
safety.
Yeah.
It's bigger
It's
than
beyond
the
stamps,
stamps.
but
It's 3 months from now.
And it
I
sounds
guess.
as if they're
November.
perhaps aesthetically deficient as well.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's how I feel too.
Yeah.
Just the way that they.
So we're over time here. We need to take a vote on what? So since we actually still are tweaking these bylaws, then this is more of a work session, right? We're not voting on anything.
I think I'd wait till we can get a draft together.
Yeah, well, actually, so there are a couple of things that it would be helpful for us to have motions from you on, if I can put these out. So first, if we could get someone to make a motion to request that staff put together a sort of proposed draft of revised bylaws incorporating the changes you've discussed here today. And then we would bring that back to you at your next meeting and hand that out, and you can look over it and see if that accurately reflects the changes you wanted, discuss any additional changes you'd like to see. That would be sort of a centralized way to give you all a starting point.
I sort of kind of did that, so I would move that we ask staff to put together a draft that reflects our discussion today for review at our next meeting.
Second.
Okay. Motion made by Nan, seconded by Lori. Any other conversation about questions? Okay. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anyone not in favor say nay. Okay, motion passes. And was there a second?
Yeah, and then it would also be good.
Thank you.
Assuming, are you okay with asking them to make a motion to go ahead and recommend a?
I think that our group would appreciate that.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and then they can do what they want with it, but at least that gives some clout to what you all done
Yes.
today.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fine.
So it would also probably be helpful for us to have a motion from you all to recommend that a letter be sent to the executive director and chair of the board for the Lexington Art League regarding the Castle Woods Down project. And that the letter state that we need engineering stamps from the for all the different pieces that were installed by a certain date. It would be helpful if you all could give us what you think is a reasonable timeline for that. And if they're not provided by that date, what you think an appropriate next step from us would be. And then also that the letter would state that they need to bring all non-conforming pieces, pieces that don't match the descriptions that were given, into conformity with the descriptions by a certain date, or what next step you all would recommend for us to take. Sorry, that's a mouthful, but.
Anybody? We're to test everyone's memories.
I would say 1 week for the engineering stamps. And
So
maybe
the date
3
of
weeks
when
for
that
the
letter-
Okay,
project
so the
compliance.
recommendation is for 3. Do you want to go ahead and make the motion?
Okay.
Can you remember what he said? Can you read over his shoulder?
Chad writes
Can I just
really
say what he
little.
said?
Right.
I have one question too before, you had mentioned too that, that we need to come up with, what happens with they're not in compliance. So
Yes.
what would that be? I mean, is it the possibility that they would have to be taken down? Even though nobody wants to do that?
Yes, ultimately the administration, either Sally or John Sheedover General Services would make that call, but yes, but he is interested in your all's recommendation. I mean, that's why he ultimately could have decided to do something like ordering it taken down without sending it back to you, but he chose to send it back to you because you're familiar with the project and more familiar with the field, and he wants your all's professional opinion on how this should be handled.
Yeah.
Well, another possibility would be that they could be fined at an amount that is commensurate with the cost of doing it. Right, so that's commensurate with the cost of getting but that
Yes.
causes someone else to have to do it.
But that doesn't cover us if a child gets hurt or someone gets hurt.
Yeah, we can't levy a fine on them for this.
We could send him a bill.
But we could tell them that they have the choice to either take it down or we will remedy it at their expense.
And they would have to pay us.
Now,
Yeah.
whether or not General Services will want to do that, I don't know, because it may be difficult to actually collect that money on the tail end from the Art League. But if that's your all's recommendation, we'll pass that along, and General Services will do what they think's best.
Well, the artwork belongs to somebody because it's been on display somewhere else and they're going to want them back.
Belongs to all those artists.
Well,
Guess it belongs to us for 2 years.
Right here, it says it right here.
I knew I liked that clause.
Yeah, Mike has to push her for that car.
I can tell you if there are, I think that's probably the best, it will be removed, or the other option of fines, because if you say, oh, well, we're demanding these again in a week, but if you don't get them, well, we'll give you another week,
Yeah.
or, well, and then again, we're back to, what is this for? Right. I mean, I don't want them coming down,
You
but-
can either remove them or they'll be barricaded. So,
But that wouldn't help with
Who
the
would do
safety. I mean, if
that?
they're
Yeah, it would.
barricaded, does that?
Oh, that'd be very safe if they were
Put
in
snow fence
boxes.
around them.
yeah,
Who's gonna
I
pay
mean,
for that?
Yeah,
The
and
city?
that would
No,
be
that's
a
a big
government expense, and we would
Yeah.
try to levy that back, or how would that work?
I mean,
if
that'd
we
be a
did that?
minimal
It could be.
expense, but.
Yeah.
The city could request that
Yeah, so,
the Arts Council garnish their grant for the amount that's owed to the city.
Now you're playing hard.
Don't mess with the name.
well, these are all,
Request that. Now, I don't know if we can do that, but the city
these
could
are all
request that.
reasonable, because anytime you're an arts organization or any organization, you have requirements. It's important as a community to respect the process.
Yeah, and as a funder as a representative of the funder, I don't make the decisions, I just do the paperwork, but we monitor carefully the performance of our arts organizations, because we
Integrity.
get their integrity. We collect money, it is not ours. When we grant it, it's not ours anymore than it ever was, and it is not theirs. It's everyone's money, and we are poor stewards of the people's money, and of the investment that the city puts in us, even though those aren't the actual dollars re-granted. We exist with to be the Arts Council and the United Arts Fund with the city's support, and if I can't unsee what I see here, and this probably is another reason this is a designated seat on this board.
It is.
That that this is the kind of poor performance that's a red light. It's an alarm. It's a red flag that that something is amiss and needs to be corrected.
Could we say your suggestion and say that, if it doesn't happen by this date, then we would make those adjustments and then bill them, and if they decided that they could not repay that, then we will remove them? Because I don't think anybody at this table wants to take them down. We're not nobody wants to get involved in that, but we just want to make them safe. So the pressure has to be big enough that they would move fast. But we also don't want them to, if the wording is not right, then they'll say, oh, the city will just take care of it, and then we won't pay them. We'll keep it in litigation forever.
No, well, and you have an arts council with an expertise in public sculpture. We, rather than, send the guys from parks out there to get them, that's probably something that we would oversee at the city's request, and we don't need anything else to do especially, but I think it would be legitimate to call on us to do that and process the return of, this is a really worst-case draconian scenario here that I'm hesitant to utter, but in the worst of all possible worlds, we could partner with the city, take these things down and get them returned and be compensated for that effort, because we hold the purse strings, or a set of purse strings, if that were legal, moral, and ethical. I think there's an argument for all of the above.
This whole project has been kind of, this just had this shadow of lack of respect for the process we needed from the beginning. So it's so disappointing to get to this point and realize that it followed through all the way to installation.
And
This
is very distressing.
Just disappointed. And I wonder how much the actual board knows that.
We can't worry about that.
When we get to
I
the
mean-
point of making a motion, I would like to change that, or suggest that we send the letter to the executive director and all the officers of the board, rather than just one board member, because one board member at any given time might be out of time. Just
Do you
so.
want to make a motion? Do you remember what?
I
Can
can
you
try.
see his-
I can.
You'd be the best.
Can you come over and just whisper while he's talking?
I'd like to make a motion that a letter is crafted and sent to the Lexington Art League, the
Executive.
executive director and the officers of the board, outlining a request for the production of the, I guess, truant engineering stamps by what day?
Wednesday, the
Week.
23rd of August.
Wednesday, the 23rd of August. Period, I think. Am I doing okay? I'm just trying to say what you said. If stamps if they fail to produce the stamps, then I guess the motion would, then we request that the city suggest making it right either by correcting the installation or boxing them in. Is that where we are?
Cordon them off.
Cordon them off.
Did you word that?
Barricade.
Until such
Barricade.
Yeah. Until such time that the engineering stamps are produced and the sculptures are made to match the descriptions.
And then if they're not by a certain date,
The city will do it at their
we'll
expense.
contemplate,
I think, and if they're not by, we can choose a date, and I think maybe the thing to do is that we would convene again to talk about what, whether, because
It'll be
then.
our third special meeting for this project.
But that it would be not really ours. We need to talk to Janet about that right first.
Ultimately, the administration, probably Sally, if not Sally, Jeff, will make the call about how they want to handle that. And I'm sure Janet will be consulted.
Second.
Can we read that back?
Okay.
Bless your heart.
Motion to send a letter to, I have LALs, but I'll put it out. Executive Director and the officers of the board outlining a request for the production of the engineering stamps by Wednesday, the 23rd of August. If they fail to produce the stamps, then they request the LFUCG corrects the installation and barricades them until such time the engineering stamps are produced and the artwork is displayed as presented. Motion by Gode, McKay, seconded. Does that sound right?
I would remove.
Sorry,
the
I'm
word.
typing as fast as I
that's
can.
good.
You did great.
I said this word, but when it's in the motion, it sounds wrong, just outlining. Because that suggests that we're asking the Art League to present us a plan. And we're asking them to present the actual stamps.
Yeah.
So, I know we're all, Robert's rules are out the window on this one, I guess, but, because I already seconded it, but, I do have a question though, where do we stand with the sculptures that are lower and a danger for kids running into it, not engineering, to the point that the engineering stamps aren't gonna cover that, do we wanna put any?
That falls
I think that's in there.
I think
It's in
that
there.
comment was
Yeah.
the last sentence, and I may have not even said it right, I'm sorry, and are displayed as presented.
Oh, okay, yeah,
That's
you said it,
Right.
yeah.
So then that would require going back through the video and seeing how they were
Yes, and I will
presented.
do that
Yeah,
ASAP.
okay.
This has been an insane week, but I'll figure it out.
I know, and I bothered you
So
on your
sorry.
vacation. I'm sorry
Yeah,
about
no,
that.
that's okay.
Should we have
Okay,
discussion?
So is there any more discussion? Okay, so the motion,
I would
yeah,
suggest, rather than us giving, I don't know how long it's gonna take Sally or whoever to send this letter out. It might be.
Well, Chad and I'll have to.
I would say
take
1
the
week
days
from
of
the day of the letter,
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah.
oh, that's accepted as a friendly amendment.
Yeah.
okay. So the motion's been amended by Tony. You want to repeat that, because I was talking to Jennifer?
Just rather than putting a firm date on it, just say a week from the date of the letter.
Okay. All right, so amended by Tony to add the date of the presentation of the stamps is amended to a week from the time the letter is sent. Okay. And second that amendment? Mike, okay, Mike, second. Okay, any more discussion on the letter that's going to go out to Lexington Art League on the Castlewood Downs project?
Can I ask for a point of clarification?
Yes.
Are you all also wanting to require them to bring the non-conforming sculptures into conformity within 1 week, or do you have a different timetable for that?
I don't think that's possible.
That's not feasible.
Well, based on what we heard, Andy said I can come in and move these things whenever, right? That was his thing. So I would say it doesn't have to be a long timeline. Could we say
Reasonable.
within 2 weeks of after the stamp? I mean, because it is a year-long exhibit, right? So, two-year-long
yes.
exhibit. So
I
I'd
mean,
say.
honestly, those are the most important things.
the
The
first thing
stamps
is
are wind
produce-
load. Those are the things that are gonna
Yeah.
injure people.
Yeah.
That's true.
So we don't want to even wait for the stamps, suppose the stamps don't, well,
Well, they matter, but they're not the whole thing. The smushed kid won't care how long we gave him to do it or how long
yeah.
the exhibit was if they get smushed, so.
Could you
I don't know,
ask
it's
for-
2 weeks?
I think 2 weeks
2 weeks
fair.
is-
Because that way, if it is Andy and he happens to be out of town and he's the only person that they
And the
are
Woodland Art
contracted
Fair
with.
comes
He was the
in
only one
between
installed.
That's this
probable
weekend.
receipt of the letter.
This weekend.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I wouldn't tie it to the stamp, I would just
Yeah,
say
make
2
a
weeks.
separate
or-
thing, yeah.
Yeah. 1 week for the
Stamp and then 2 weeks for
for the,
Fix
From the
it.
date of the receipt of the letter.
I think
on
we'll
the date
get,
of the issuance.
we'll get the stamps 2 days after the letter for sure. And then if they have trouble fulfilling that 2-week timeline, we'll hear from them as well. So I
I would
So
be
second
frustrated with
amendment
stamps
to the letter
out if there's
is
things on.
to clarify a timeline for completing the rest of the accuracy of the sculpture so they reflect as they were presented 2 weeks from the time the letter goes out. Okay? Make
So
a
this is
motion.
a silly question, I'm sorry,
More
I'm not any near an artist, but, so if you get an engineering stamp and you change the base, that doesn't matter? Or, I guess I'm confused.
The engineering stamps, we were told that the
Okay.
engineering stamps were all based on these particular bases.
Right.
And the engineers probably also were told that the ones that needed 2 bases had 2 bases.
Yeah.
So it's possible that the engineering stamps aren't going to be on what's on display.
Okay.
That's really bad.
Yeah, what do you think about this, Ed?
What,
so
here's what I think has happened. The engineer has not seen this installation.
Yeah.
He's working from drawings and from conceptuals, and he gave an okay, I'll approve this if it looks like this. They went out there, they installed it, it's not what he's agreed on, and so he's not going to approve it.
Yeah.
No engineer will do that.
So they might be getting the same pressure from the engineer to change
Exactly.
things.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it could, that's what I'm thinking, that,
And they had an engineering company on the drawings, was there something?
Vogue.
I think,
Well,
Yeah.
there were some engineering companies that had provided stamps for the installations of these sculptures in other places, which was meant to reassure us that these could be safely installed. But I don't, and they were asking Pogue to do it, but I don't think Pogue had actually.
I don't know
When we
if they
saw
were
the drawings, I don't
stamps.
think Pogue had seen the drawings.
Not all of them were stamps, they were just, like, did you actually see any stamps on, actually, I have it.
I remember
But I
a
guess
stamp,
that's my
but
question,
Yeah,
is that,
on one, I
don't
think
we
it's-
need them to get the bases? I think our time, maybe I'm just overthinking this, but if we need a week for the engineering stamps, but 2 weeks to get them displayed, don't we need a week to get them displayed right, and then another week to get the stamp? Like, they'll be stamping something that's
Oh, I
not
see what you're
installed
saying.
right,
Yeah,
or am I
yeah.
reading, am I
maybe we
thinking
need
about
an
this
or,
wrong?
that they either need to provide us with this, they need to prove that they're installed correctly now.
Yeah.
And that's either providing us with engineering stamps,
Yeah.
Why don't we
or
just say 2
getting them
weeks
to the
on
point where they
everything?
can get
Yeah.
stamps.
Yeah.
Just do 2 weeks.
Just say 2 weeks on everything.
because I'm with Jennifer, I don't
That's right,
understand
an
this as
engineer
well.
won't do that.
But basically, if they get an engineering stamp, that doesn't necessarily mean though that it's up high enough to keep a kid from, it's just
wind
wind
load,
load
yeah.
and that kind of thing.
But the height
would affect
the wind load.
But the,
I mean, it's involved, but not necessarily if this is 7 feet or 8 feet.
But it does- it does-
just
right, but I see what you're saying, so if they give them a stamp and it's down 5 feet and it's at a point where like a kid could go running and accidentally could get their head caught in it,
ratios.
and then they raise it, that stamp is no longer necessarily valid, right?
That's what I'm asking, maybe you
Yeah.
said it more
Yeah.
eloquently than
Yeah.
me, but
But-
that's,
But as presented, then means a lot more in that statement than anything.
As
Because
presented,
if
then.
they
As
presented it,
To this board and to the engineers.
right, exactly.
Yeah.
So if somehow they misrepresented to the engineer how high it was gonna be, or they misrepresented it to the board, and I wasn't here for the presentation, so
Or they just got it in however they could
It was
get
a
it
good
in that day with the bases they had, and
That's
are hoping
basically
for
what
the
happened.
best.
that sounds like it.
The best did not occur.
Andy Light.
So.
Yeah.
Okay, so
Heard that.
the amendment to the amendment to the amendment is that,
She was here too.
this is what we do at Sayre. the amendment to the amendment to the amendment is that we add, that we give a 2-week deadline for both the engineering stamps and conforming to what was presented within 2 weeks of the time the letter goes out.
Yeah, I think that's good.
Anybody want to make a motion to that?
Hypothetically, what if something happens between now and when all of that information comes back? Like worst case scenario, a kid gets hurt or somebody gets hurt. Is the city still covered under that, or is that?
There's a lot of detail there that I'd prefer not to get into. But yes,
Okay.
yes.
We're already running late. Sorry, I just wanted to know if we needed to do anything.
I'm assuming they have their own insurance also. They're required to, actually. Okay.
Second or third
Yeah.
or fourth, whatever it is.
No one's
now.
made the motion yet to accept the amendment.
Oh, yes, I accept all these
Okay.
amendments as amendments.
Second.
Okay, any further discussion about the letter that's going to be drafted by
No.
staff? Okay. All right, then, all in favor? Aye. Anyone not in favor, say nay. Okay, so motion passes that we have accepted the details of the letter. Any other business? All right, meeting is adjourned. Thank you all. That was
Thank you.
good.
Good meeting.
And Mike has agreed to
Yeah.
participate in this letter writing.
No, not the letter writing,
I
the
mean,
application.
the bylaws,
Yeah, you don't want me writing the
yeah. No, I'm not
He's
saying
gonna do
yeah.
the bylaw, I mean,
No, I'm gonna do
the letter of
application.
the application.
Oh,
the clarity of the application.
Okay, you can do that. And anybody want to participate in amending, in the wording of the bylaws?
Lori, I have a quick question for you. So,
Thank you, Nan.
maybe.
Can always count on you. And our next meeting is, I have that on my phone. I need to go get my phone in the other room.
The next meeting.
Trying to get a sculpture in that park.
November 15th. But Chad and I will, of course, keep everybody updated as we go here. So,
Thank you all.
I'm sure you'll be hearing from us. Chad's got his experience writing letters the last couple of weeks.
Does our cameraman know that we're?